Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Politics Today, and in this programme we shall be discussing the British military's drive for inclusion and diversity, which is having untold spiritual consequences for our armed forces as they're turning their back on Christianity. And in this programme today I'm joined by Pastor Chis Wickland of Living Word Ministries, together with Alistair Scott, who's the UK Director for Vision for Israel. I'll start off with you, Chris. Great to have you back on Politics Today, and we're going to make the most of you while you're here, because you've been out in the States and filming for a new documentary and mixing with Hollywood and everything else. So do you want to share with our viewers a little bit about this very powerful film that you've been involved in regarding your testimony?
Yeah, so it's a film called The Glory of God. And it's basically about 6 people's life stories. So there's me, who went from witchcraft to Christ. There's a girl that had an experience where God sent her to hell for about half an hour. Another girl who was a drug addict that went to heaven, met Jesus. A family where their 9-year-old boy died of cancer and what God did in that family. And another story of a guy who was a preacher that didn't believe God heals, and he was preaching how God doesn't heal. And while he was preaching that, his throat got miraculously healed. So it's a story about these 6 people, and the film's called The Glory of God, and basically what they're going to do now for the next sort of 10 months is they've interviewed us. It's like a docu-movie, so you get the interviews of us, and then there'll be cut scenes to much better looking, younger versions of ourselves, outworking our story and stuff. So it's going to be exciting, and it's kind of based on the premise that God can, He will, but even if He doesn't, and there's the power of God in those difficult times and through good stuff as well. So it's going to be a real powerful film, I think, that will meet people on various different levels. Amazing. So hopefully you'll be humble enough to appear on Revelation TV when you come back and this film's released in a year's time, Chris. Hopefully. And Alistair, great to have you back on the programme. It's always a pleasure to have you on the programme. Just share with us your thoughts on this shocking story that the Daily Mail covered recently, that the Ministry of Defence has told its soldiers to avoid Christian elements in Acts of Remembrance, to encourage diversity and inclusion. What are your thoughts on this shocking development?
Yeah, it's a worrying thought, isn't it? Because we're getting more and more. It does seem to be the Christians that get hit in every area. And, you know, I've said this on programs before, we really do need to challenge the fact that the Christianity of our nation is being challenged greatly. We know that from everything else that's going on. But so important for us to be people who pray. We were talking earlier about how God is re-establishing the house of prayer in the church, and the church to be a house of prayer for our nation and the nations of the earth. And we need to be praying and standing against this attempts to restrict Christianity in almost every form of life, but in our armed forces, where our forces in the last 100 years and longer have fought world wars with the belief that Christ is a saviour, and they've done it for freedom, for us to have freedom of choice, freedom of religion. To think that now coming into this 21st century and we are seeing such restriction coming, so come on, let's fight back.
Absolutely. And Chris, what do you make of the fact that the Ministry of Defence, and it very much looks like this is the civil service, inclusion and diversity is having a detrimental impact on Christianity within the armed forces? And just as Alistair said, you know, it's been for centuries that Christianity has been at the forefront of our armed forces, whether that was fighting Napoleon, whether that was sending our troops over to Belgium and France to defeat Imperial Germany during the First World War, or whether that was fighting the Germans and the Nazis, or whether that was pushing back the Soviet threat. Christianity has remained an integral part of our armed forces. So what are your thoughts on this drive to push Christianity out of our armed forces?
Well, it just seems to be evident everywhere. It's in the police, it seems to be in schools, it's everywhere. So I guess it was only a matter of time before it hit the military. But again, you know, with this drive of multiculturalism, inclusion and diversity, it's kind of oxymoronic, because actually it's not inclusive. It's very specific in what it doesn't want and what it does want. Yeah. And so with respect, because Islam is the flavour of the month to multiculturalism, they're the ones that get the green card. Hey guys, we're going to really give you the spotlight. We really want you guys in on what we're doing, but at the expense of Christians, at the expense of Jews. And it's quite clear. I mean, you can see now there's loads of statistics that are coming out across various companies around the world that they are not getting in good men to do certain jobs because they've got to tick the boxes where it must be women or it must be minorities, etc. And so, you know, I just think this is just yet another erosion of Christianity in our nation. And I think you know, it's a slap in the face to the heritage of this nation, and that Christianity has been a part of this nation. And Christianity played a fundamental part in the Second World War, where you had our king and our prime minister calling us for days of national prayer. Absolutely. And just to say, oh, that's not relevant anymore, we're not interested in that anymore, I think is very, very irreverent and irrespectful, and lacks respect for those soldiers that gave their lives for this nation and the freedoms that they fought to uphold.
Yeah. And I was saying, Alistair, that this is a drive for inclusion and diversity, and this is clearly coming from the civil service, as they're trying to do this across the whole of government. But really, they're trying to pursue a liberal, multi-faith, ethnic agenda that will threaten the military's morale and unity of our entire forces. I just want to read you out this. This is from their instructions on inclusive behaviour. It was published in the Telegraph last week. It says the Army's policy, guidance and instructions on inclusive behaviours, published in June 2022, states that acts of remembrance on Armistice Day and others should be inclusive and seek to avoid being constructed as a wholly religious event. The guidance continues. Acts of remembrance should be agnostic of religious elements and separated from remembrance service. This may be achieved by holding a religious service after the act of remembrance. Now, what do you make of this? Because this is shameful and shocking for all those British soldiers, men and women who have died fighting on the battlefield for our freedom, for our liberty, and also for our Christian freedoms against evil and tyranny.
I mean, they call it inclusivity, but it's anything but, because it's basically saying if you are a believer, you cannot express your faith. And, you know, it's the faith in God that has really seen us prosper as a nation. I mean, maybe we're struggling a little at this time, but without the faith element, the foundation of the gospel, you know, our nation needs more and more inclusivity of Christian faith rather than excluding it. It seems like you can be everything else, but you cannot proclaim your Christianity. Why is that? How can you call this inclusive? Basically, inclusive means you've got to fit into this little box. And if you have anything outside that box, they don't want you to be even part of the armed forces. And that's very frightening, because I mean, most of our great commanders, leaders in the past have been believers. You know, if you look through the history books and read of the faith element in people during the Second World War, during the First World War, even the wars before that in the previous century, it's essential that we get back to the Christian basis of our nation. But Chris said that earlier, it's being eroded in every part of life, whether it's your business life, whether it's our schools, universities. Universities are a dangerous place for a Christian these days. I know many people who've gone into university, strong Christians, and then because of the peer pressure have come out having lost their faith. And that we mustn't allow that to happen. We cannot allow that to happen in our nation if we want our nation to remain in the forefront of a godly, God-fearing nation. It's important that we stand up, we pray, and challenge these laws or rules or regulations that are going through our parliaments at this time.
Yeah. And it matters so much to the British Army because it's a matter of life and death. No other profession do you literally put your life on the line, knowing that if you're on the battlefield and deployed to the battlefield, you face kind of the prospect of death. And this is why it's so important. But Chris, as a pastor, share with us your perspective on the importance of military chaplains and the importance of having a Christian service, particularly of remembrance service, when we remember those who have sacrificed their lives for the freedoms that we have today.
Well, that pastoral element is really important. And it's important that if you've got different soldiers, yes, of different faiths, that you have chaplains that can represent their, those positions. And if we are pushing out Judaism, we're pushing out Christianity at the expense of being politically correct to Islam, and because they're the flavour of the month, well then you're denying the soldiers that currently serve an opportunity, because there's things that soldiers experience and go through that most of us will never experience. They need someone that they can talk to, and they would rather confide a lot of the time in like a pastor or a chaplain or something of their faith that they can pray and they can talk to and they can open their souls. I wouldn't feel comfortable if I was on the front line, and I don't mean this disrespectfully, but I wouldn't feel comfortable going to someone who represents Islam. I would want someone that I could go to and say, this is how I'm feeling, I really could do with your prayer, I really could do with your support. And so by minimising that pastoral support, I think it's not only dangerous, but I think it's mean, and I think it's cruel to the soldiers that are actually, all for the sake of ticking the politically correct box. I think it's cruel and sad to make our armed services suffer just so we can tick the box.
Absolutely. So, of course, in that category would also include liberal progressives, for example, other religions are multi-faith, and also this growing secularisation of having a very secular military as well that's devoid of values. Alistair, thankfully, we've had a strong response from our Defence Secretary, Grant Shapps, and he said this to the Telegraph. A spokesman on his behalf said this, that he was furious about this policy, with a source close to him telling the Telegraph the Secretary of State is Jewish, and he's not offended one bit by Christian Remembrance Service. In fact, he believes at the core of our nation's history and who we are. How important is it that we pray and also support our current Defence Secretary?
Let's stand with this man for his openness in expressing his heart, really. Because how much support is he getting from the rest of the cabinet? I don't know, but he's absolutely right in what he's saying. I mean, you look around at our government now, and we've got it's not surprising in a way what's going on, because our Prime Minister is not of our faith. We have the Mayor of London, similarly, the leader of the SNP, similar. But we have this man standing, who is Jewish, as you said, and he's standing up for Christian faith, and because he understands the importance of it. I mean, I think he's somebody who's studied history, and he knows that Christianity has been the foundation of this nation. We've drifted away from it, I know that, but we do not want it to slip any further. So it's, thank goodness for Grant Shapps. But then, we're going to have an election shortly, and who knows what happens at the next election. We need to be praying for the godly results on that one, otherwise our nation could slip further and further away from the Christian faith and the Christian foundations that we hold up to now. And for the church, let's wake up and see what's going on and start to be what we were talking about earlier, people who pray. I sometimes get asked, should Christians be involved in politics? And I say, well, Christians should be involved in every area of our lives, because we bring light into dark places, and we bring confrontation. We can confront, not in a hostile way, but we can confront the wrongs that are going on in our nation by showing how it should be, how it has been, and how it can be if we just turn in the right direction.
Well, politics is extremely important, because politics and those in power govern over us. They introduce legislation that affects us, and in this case, where we're seeing, for example, the civil service having an influence over the Ministry of Defence to purge Christianity from armed forces, that has a detrimental impact on our faith. So if soldiers then feel they can't practice their faith, memorial service no longer remember God in that, and we take that out of the equation, we become an increasingly secular, multicultural society. We lose our values, and in a time of war, spiritually we won't know where to turn to, because our leaders have forgotten who they are, and they've forgotten our history, which is extremely dangerous. And Chris, what would you say are the spiritual dangers of this policy to pursue inclusion and diversity at the expense of our Christian heritage in this country? And like you said in the beginning of the programme, it was thanks to the likes of Rev Chis, the very powerful intercessor in Wales, who interceded for this nation during the Second World War. We had a godly king in George V. Churchill said we are defending Christian civilization in the war against the Nazis. It was those times of of days of repentance and fasting and days of prayer that saved us during Dunkirk, during the Battle of Britain, also helped us with the D-Day landings to liberate Europe from the Nazis. So to take God, or the Christian God, or the one and only God out of the equation, we're now going to turn to other gods. This is an affront to the God of Israel, is it not?
Yeah. Well, the first thing we need to know about multiculturalism, and I don't think a lot of people actually understand this, is that it's an intellectual form of Marxism. And it was always designed to be that. See, Marxism in its purest form was about class wars, but obviously we don't have that issue anymore. So from an academic point of view, it was how can we bring Marxism into the West? And so they said, well, we can't make class an issue anymore, so what we'll do is we'll make gender an issue, we'll make race the issue. And so basically, the wooden horse that's coming in, the Trojan horse, is multiculturalism. But actually, really, it's just another word for Marxism. It's part of the Trojan horse to get it in. But of course, the problem with that is that because we've had now multiculturalism in this country for 25 years because of Tony Blair and stuff, there's been lots of white papers done about multiculturalism, and has it actually added any value to our society? Has it done what it says on the tin? If anything, it's caused our country to become weaker economically, it's caused more division in our country, and it's caused more ghettoizing of communities rather than bringing them together. And so this, but then, no disrespect, and I'm probably making a sweeping statement in saying this, but it seems that the civil service always seem to be the spearhead of this stuff. Even they're stopping government from getting legislation through because they have their own agenda. And when you begin to realize that is this really a form of Marxism that they're trying to bring into our country? They're not interested in multi-faith. They're not interested in really multiculturalism. It's about causing division. It's divide and conquer, dividing one off the other. And to do this into our armed services. See, what worries me with liberal ideologies is that you're going to have these people. So liberal ideology states this: all white people are born racist, okay, because we're guilty of colonialism and all that kind of stuff. Okay, so you're taught in liberal ideology to hate your country, all right? So you're going to get people that you're going to get all-inclusive to come into the army, and when it comes to the front line, you're going to have a whole bunch of soldiers like, well, I don't even want to fight for this country that I'm part of because I hate my country because I've been brainwashed to believe that my country is foul and wicked and deprived, therefore I want nothing to do with it. How can you have those kind of people as your war machine on the front lines? I think it's literally a form of suicide what we're doing to ourselves. You know, I think it's really dangerous. And if politicians don't wake up and see what's going on here, I just don't know where this is going to lead, but it's not good.
No, absolutely. And Alistair, regarding the civil servants in the Ministry of Defence turning their back on Christianity, isn't there a huge danger, as Chris has so articulately outformed, that this will have a huge impact on morale? This will have a huge impact on our soldiers fighting in combat. And after all, we have that famous expression on the battlefront that there are no atheists in foxholes. You know, when you're a soldier, whether you're in our armed forces and you're facing that prospect of death, you know, this is when you need God more than anyone. And I was reminded of the film, I don't know if you've seen the film with Brad Pitt called Fury. And he is following a tank crew in April of 1945 when the American tanks go into Germany at the end of the war. And they ask their new gunner, for example, are you a Christian? We said, sort of. We says, you need to know, because you could die on the battlefield at any moment. You need to know whether you're a Christian or not. So when you take that into account, isn't it imperative then that Christianity is protected with the armed services? Otherwise, you are sending our soldiers into the battle line, fighting a war, and they don't know where they could end up spiritually.
Absolutely. I mean, we've seen in the recent war, even in what's happened in Israel recently, how secularism was kind of dominating things in Israel for a season, and suddenly the war came along, and it's brought the soldiers back to the knees. They've suddenly become a praying people because, you know, when you're fighting an enemy and you have a high percentage chance of your life being taken, you need some assurance that there is something beyond your life, eternity. And we, in the Christian faith, we know that we're only temporarily, we're sojourners on the earth at this time. And it's so important for the Christian message to be portrayed within the armed forces so that they have a hope beyond life on earth. And you know, as Chris talked about earlier, chaplaincies, these were Christian people who were there to talk with soldiers because, you know, there's traumas that happen, not even at war, but even in training for war. You know, people lose their lives even in the training process. And it's so important to have the basic truth of our faith available so that people can come and have prayer times, you know, and it's important for us even to be praying for our military forces as Christians, because they are, in these times in which we're living, there's wars going on, wars and rumors of wars. Matthew 24 is opening up before us. And you never know how much we're going to be involved in another major combat, because it's spreading. It's spreading. You can see the ships being attacked by the Houthis down in the Red Sea area and so on. And our air force is being involved in flights and so on with raids. So it's so important for us to get back into the faith, because I'm sure there are a lot of believers within the armed forces on all sides, and they don't want to have to hide their faith. Why should they? They are believers, and they should. I'm sure most of them would be very, very strongly against what the plan of the government or the civil services here. And I would really stand up for your faith and know you're not alone. There's many of us who would be standing with you and praying for change to come.
Absolutely. So, Chris, former British military officers have warned in a powerful open letter to the MOD. This is what they said. The military is being forced into a moral disarmament due to the lunacy of pushing woke ideas. How important is it that Christians who are serving in our armed forces speak up against this wokeness, and that we support ministries like the Armed Forces Christian Union, who I know is personally head up by a great guy called, who's a friend of mine, a Major General Rhett Parkinson?
Yeah, I think it's really important that Christians speak up. I mean, it goes without saying. But the problem is with a lot of Christians is they don't really understand what's going on. They don't understand this multiculturalism, because we're British and we like to be polite and we like to be nice and we don't want to offend people. So as Christians, we kind of like slip into that mold a bit. And so multiculturalism seems, well, what's the harm in it, etc. And so a lot of Christians don't really understand the spirit behind multiculturalism, which, as I said, is really a form of Marxism. Its ideology is actually to suppress religion. So at the moment, although Muslims are the flavour of the month, the Muslims know that their time is up soon, because I've had Muslims say that if this is this respect that your people show for the religion of your fathers, you know, where you're like, well, it's not important to us, then we know that that's exactly what you're going to do to us. So they know it's coming. And so they're not stupid. And so, you know, and this is the thing, the Christians always seem to be behind the curve on this. I've done a lot of reading, a lot of research into what is this whole, you know, what is woke ideology, what is liberal ideology. And when I found out where it comes from and the damage that it's doing, and to put this into the armed services, which is the front, the spear, if you like, of our country, to defend our country. And if you have people that have this moral dilemma of whether they should even fight for their country because they don't believe it, you've just got disunity in the ranks, and it's really dangerous. I think Christians, especially in the armed services, need to be speaking up. If I'm honest with you, I don't quite know how much pushback the Christians can give, because obviously it's coming from the civil service, because they don't, with respect, from my experience of what I hear, they don't really seem to listen to anybody. But the Christians do need to be praying, because obviously it's prayer that's going to turn this thing around. If anything's going to turn it around, it's going to be prayer.
Yeah. And the other aspect of this one as well, which is really interesting. So GB News reported recently how, for example, white working class males now are being discriminated against joining armed forces, and historically they have made up our armed forces, whether it's the Air Force, whether it's the British Army or the Navy. They have made up the core part of our armed forces. They've literally put their lives on the line throughout the centuries by serving this nation, and now they're being discriminated against. And it seems also that this is danger to meritocracy in the British Army, that we want the best of the best. We want those who are committed to fighting and defending this country, rather than ticking diversity boxes for people who don't care very much about the state of the nation, as Chris has said. They will be on the front line. So they're going to be no match for an enemy, particularly as we hear that we could be facing the prospect of a third world war involving Russia, China and Iran, and that we might have to call up our civilian population to fight. How is this going to have an impact on our ability to fight and push back evil if we destroy Christianity within our armed forces?
It's a big challenge, isn't it? It's a big problem that has to be faced. And as Chris has said, the answer is the praying people rise up and start to pray strong, that things change at government level and civil service level, because they seem to be the dominating rulers in some ways of our nation. But we mustn't forget that in the previous wars we did have amazing support and help from ethnic groups, the Nepalese and the Indians and the Pakistanis during the war. But when it comes down to a choice, I mean, particularly if there's faith involved, if it's a fight against, say, Iran or some of the Islamic nations, and you've got Islamic people in the armed forces, they have a difficult choice to make. If they don't have a great deal of respect or love for our nation, and they've got to choose between their religion and their nation, which one are they going to choose? And even if they're kind of hiding what they want to do, they're there as potentially, I'm not saying they are, potentially the enemy within. And I've always said the biggest problem is fighting the enemy who's inside your nation and the one who's outside, because you know where the enemy is when he's outside, but when he's your next door neighbor potentially, or in the suburb down the road, it's a very, very difficult fight. So I believe, as we're making the point very clearly, it's so important to protect the Christianity basis, foundation in our military forces, to not only to try and keep it, but to encourage it, encourage those, because they are, as you said earlier, the fighters who fought the last wars, the major wars we've had impact our nation over the last 100 years, have been because people had faith and wanted to save the faith of our nation.
Absolutely. Within 30 seconds, Chris, how should we respond to this, and how should we be praying?
Well, the only way to respond to this is prayer. And Christians do need to be politically engaged. You look at the Bible, there were great men and women of God that were involved in key positions of power in authority throughout our Old Testament Bible stories. So the idea that politics, I don't want to get my hands dirty, these are the times we need to get our hands dirty. So we need political activism, but more than that, we need prayer, prayer, prayer. And that's the only answer to this, really.
Excellent. So, Alistair and Chris, thank you so much for being my guest on this week's edition of Politics Today. Thank you for watching at home. I mean, what's happening to our armed forces is nothing but absolutely shameful. And we need to put the civil service to shame with their diversity and inclusion policies. It's important that we pray for our brave soldiers and military personnel fighting for us, and keep them in our prayers, and let's push back this wokery. So thank you for watching this week's edition of Politics Today.